Well, first of all, thank you. So many things have happened in the last 2 weeks. I keep thinking, where's Jeff Sachs? I want to know what this means. So the most dramatic and, from my perspective, unexpected thing that happened was all of a sudden the government in Syria changed. There was regime change in Syria. Who did that? Why? And what does it mean?
Well, it's part of a 30-year effort. This is Netanyahu's war to remake the Middle East. It's been a disaster. It continues to be a disaster. But as Netanyahu himself said after Assad left, we have remade the Middle East. And so it has to be understood as something that didn't just happen in a week, but has been an ongoing war throughout the Middle East. And maybe the right way to understand what's happened with Syria is to think back to a really remarkable occasion when Wesley Clark, the general who headed NATO,
yes,
went to the Pentagon just after 9/11, and famously he was showed a piece of paper that said we're going to have 7 wars in 5 years, and he was completely dumbfounded. He said, "What does this have to do with anything?" And he was told that the neocons and the Israelis are going to remake the Middle East. And the 7 countries on the list are very telling. They were Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and then in Africa, Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. And 7 countries, we've been at war in 6 of them now. And I mean, we, the United States, on behalf of Israel, including in Syria. And so what happened in Syria last week was the culmination of a long-term effort by Israel to reshape the Middle East in its image. That started with Netanyahu and his American advisors in 1996 in something called Clean Break, which was a political document that the Americans and Netanyahu made when Netanyahu became prime minister. After 9/11, it went into full gear with the Iraq wars being the first of those wars.
Clean break, what does that refer to?
Clean break is we're going to make a clean break of the Middle East.
A break with the past.
We're going to break with the past. We're not going to have land for peace, which is the idea that Israel would have a Palestinian state next door. No, we're going to have greater Israel, and we're just going to bash anybody that doesn't like it. And we're going to do that by bringing down any government that supports the Palestinians. It's a rather shocking amount of hubris. It has been, in my view, a complete disaster for the United States and for the Middle East. It has been Netanyahu's MO since 1996, actually, and he's been prime minister more than half the time since then. And the United States goes to war on his behalf. And what happened in Syria is the culmination of that effort. So 7 wars in 5 years. Netanyahu came to the U.S. in 2002, after 9/11. Actually, he came in September 20th, 2001, if I remember correctly, and gave a speech that said, "There's terrorism, but you don't fight the terrorists, you fight the governments that back the terrorists." That's the idea. So you go to war. You don't just have a kind of an anti-terrorism effort, you go to war. And the first of those wars was Iraq, but Syria was supposed to be exactly the next war. And the timeline was this remarkable idea of 7 wars in 5 years. According to all of the understanding that we now have from lots of insiders, from documents, from the archives, what happened was the U.S. got bogged down in Iraq. There was the insurgency. We didn't move onward to the next war, which was to be Syria, which was to happen already 20 years ago. But in 2011, what really brought Assad down last week started under Obama. And this is also interesting. It doesn't really matter who's president. This is long-term deep state policy. Obama ordered the CIA to overthrow Assad. So that started in 2011.
But why would Obama want to overthrow Assad?
Because Israel has run American foreign policy in the Middle East for 30 years. That's how it works. We have an Israel lobby. We have this clean break strategy. We have a plan for 7 wars in 5 years. And what's interesting is they actually kind of carry out this madness. They don't explain any of it to the American people. They don't tell anybody, but you can watch step by step. We've had 6 of those 7 wars. The only one that hasn't happened is Iran. And if you watch every day now, the MSM, the mainstream media, is pushing for U.S. war with Iran. Netanyahu's pushing for war with Iran. They're really trying to get this started to make 7 out of 7. But Obama, for no particular reason, by the way, but he launched 2 of these wars on the list of 7. He launched the war to bring down the Libyan government, Muammar Gaddafi, in the fall of, the war started in March 2011. And he and Hillary Clinton, his Secretary of State, said Assad must go in the spring of 2011. I remember scratching my head at the time, saying, oh, that's interesting. How are they going to do that? Syria was a normal functioning country at the time, despite whatever you read, whatever propaganda is said. Syria was a normal functioning country. I recently dredged out a report by the International Monetary Fund on Syria in 2009 that praised the Syrian government for its reforms and its rapid economic growth and looked forward to continued years of economic development. In other words, it was not this wasteland or this battlefield. It was an actual normal country.
Was it a threat to the United States?
It was no threat to the United States whatsoever, but it was deemed to be by Netanyahu a threat to Israel because of a simple reason, which is that Netanyahu wants to control all of Palestine, wants to rule over the Palestinian people, does not want a Palestinian state, and that has led to militant opposition. That's led to Hamas, that's led to Hezbollah, that's led to other groups. Netanyahu's theory is, well, we're never going to allow a Palestinian state, so we have to bring down any government that supports those militant groups against us, because our core aim is greater Israel. That's not much of a worthy cause, by the way. Having a Palestinian state next door and having peace could have saved probably 1 million lives by now over the last 30 years. But that's not Netanyahu's crazy ambition, which is...
What is greater Israel?
Greater Israel means, depending on how crazy the people are, either that Israel controls not only its geographic territory, but that it essentially controls or annexes the West Bank, the Golan Heights, which they've just enlarged, Gaza.
Golan Heights being part of Syria historically.
It was part of Syria. It's claimed by Israel, and now with an expanded territory, and East Jerusalem. So everything that was captured in 1967, Netanyahu explicitly said, we're never giving that back. Now, there are 2 motivations for that. One, Netanyahu says, not safe to give it back because he doesn't want to negotiate any kind of peace or any state of Palestine. Then there are religious zealots, I would use even stronger terms, who use the book of Joshua, which is 2,700 years ago, that said, well, God gave us everything from the river in Egypt, meaning the Nile, to the Euphrates. And there are zealots in Israel, and they're in the government, who believe yes, this is God's ordinance. We're going to take whatever we want.
So the Nile to the Euphrates would include what?
Well, if you take the if you take the greater view of this, it would include Lebanon, it would include Syria, it would include part of Iraq, it would include part of Egypt, and some of these people actually quote the Bible and say we're going to do this, and it's a little sad and absolutely terribly frightening. But I'd say the more narrow vision is what they call from the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. That's taken as a pro-Palestinian chant. It's exactly the opposite. It is the greater Israel literal vision of the government of Israel. It's the literal idea. There happen to be 7 million Palestinians there. That's a minor problem. Maybe they can be ethnically cleansed. Maybe they can be thrown out. Maybe they can just be ruled in military dominant way. Of course, probably well over 100,000 have been killed in the most recent war by Israel. Official count 45,000 of bodies claimed from the rubble, but we know that there are a lot more that have died since this war in Gaza began. But all of this is to say, this greater Israel idea says we can't make peace with the Palestinians, so anyone that supports the Palestinians is, by definition, a mortal threat to us, and when you have a mortal threat, you must destroy it. And so this is the opposite of diplomacy. It's war, and as Netanyahu crowed last week, it's war to remake the Middle East. It's all spelled out, by the way, in very clear ways, but you have to dig for them. You have to find them. You have to understand that this is long-standing. You have to understand that each president has played part of that role. So when we come back to Obama, he started the war with Syria in 2011. I can remember actually vividly the call that Assad must go. And I did scratch my head. I think it was on Morning Joe when it was said, and I was asked by Joe Scarborough, what do you think? And I said, well, that's pretty odd. How's he going to do that? Turned out it was going to be 13 years of mass war, 300,000 dead, and destroying a country. That's what it turned out to be. But Obama signed an order called Operation Timber Sycamore. People should look it up. You can find it online, but you can't find it in the mainstream media because it's not discussed. But it was a so-called presidential finding that the CIA should work with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, with others to overthrow the government of Syria. So that was the plan. We went to war. We had...
this is what led to Benghazi, correct?
Benghazi is Libya. So Libya...
I understand.
Yes, but it was the same time in 2011.
But my understanding was the reason there were so many American intel assets there was because they were moving arms from Libya to...
Oh, sorry. Yes, if you say it that way.
Syria.
One of the first things was to establish a rat line, so-called, from Libya to Syria. Absolutely. And Seymour Hersh wrote a terrific piece explaining all of that.
But that was never explained. I mean, I worked at a news organization at the time that made a lot out of Benghazi and the death of a U.S. ambassador and, what was the Obama administration, thinking. They were so negligent. But there was never any discussion about what they were doing there in the first place.
No, none of this is explained, of course. It's none of the public's business. This is our business. We're the war machine. You stay out of this. So none of this is explained. Interestingly, the whole Syrian operation, I think I counted right that the New York Times mentioned Operation Timber Sycamore, I think 3 times in the 2010s. So a war that cost billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, CIA operation, covert action, links with Libya, never explained, never discussed. And even when the government falls last week, no background given. We're supposed to have amnesia. We're not supposed to understand that what happens is the result of long-term plans that have been pretty disastrous. And by the way, as I've said, Israel has driven so many American wars. And we say, absolutely, yes, that's our greatest ally. These have been at huge cost to the United States, cost of trillions of dollars, cost geopolitically, but somehow we gave away our foreign policy to Israel years and years ago, and it's been absolutely devastating. And it's interesting to go back and watch Netanyahu speak to the American people. Go look at a video clip of 2001, 2002. In 2002, in October, he comes and testifies in the Senate. And there's a nice clip of him promising how wonderful the war in Iraq is going to be because Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He says 100% certain. Complete lies, by the way, and they knew that they were lies at the time. And it's going to be wonderful. We're going to topple that dictator, and then dictators are going to be toppled everywhere, and the young people of Iran are going to rise up. This is his idea, together with his U.S. political consultants, together with neocons in the U.S. government for the last 25 years. They have never apologized for dragging the United States into countless wars in the Middle East, spending trillions of dollars running up U.S. debt, and doing what? Creating chaos. So just to go back to the 7 countries, because it's worth remembering, Lebanon, it barely exists as a functioning country right now. Syria, it's going to be picked to pieces. Don't believe. Well, it's obvious in what we're seeing every day. Territorial integrity, yeah. Israel's just invaded from the southwest into deeper Syria. Turkey from the north. Russia has its area. The United States and the Kurds have their area. This place is just going to be a battlefield for years to come. Iraq, we know what happened with Iraq. Trillions of dollars, a complete destabilization of the country. Look at the other 3 wars. The United States broke apart Sudan. Why? Well, Sudan was an enemy of Israel, so we have to break apart Sudan. So we supported the South Sudanese. Now we have the real trifecta: massive civil war in Sudan and massive civil war in South Sudan. In other words, we broke apart the country, and now there's civil war in both halves of the country. Somalia basically doesn't exist as a country. Libya, it doesn't exist. It's a battlefield. It's a war zone. So that's 6 out of 6. And Netanyahu's crowing, now we go on to Iran.
Do you ever feel like you can't trust the things you hear or read? Like every news source is hollow, distorted, or clearly just propaganda lying to you? Well, you're not imagining it. If the last few years have proven anything, it's that legacy media exists to distort the truth and to control you, to gatekeep information from the public instead of letting you know what's actually going on. They don't want you to know. But there is, however, a publication that fights this, that is not propaganda, one that we read every month and have for many years. It's called Imprimis. It's from Hillsdale College in Michigan. Imprimis is a free speech digest that features some of the best minds in the country addressing the questions that actually matter, the ones that are not addressed in the Washington Post or on NBC News. The best part of it, it is free, no cost whatsoever, no strings attached. They just send it to you. Hillsdale will send Imprimis right to your house, no charge. All you got to do is ask. Go to tuckerforhillsdale.com and subscribe for free today. That's tuckerforhillsdale.com. The only way this stays a democracy is if the citizenry is informed. You can't fight tyranny if you don't know what's going on. Imprimis helps. It's free. Don't wait. Sign up now. Who's paid for all this?
You have. I have. Of course. This is, where does $28 trillion of debt come from? We've paid probably $7 trillion if you add it up, according to Brown University studies, for example. Something like $7 trillion has gone into this. Israel couldn't do this for one day. Israel, Netanyahu, we are lions. Yeah, right, you are liars. But we are the ones funding you, arming you, paying for all of this. That's the United States. And this is weird to me because we say yes to defend our ally. No. We're doing their foreign policy, which makes no sense, which doesn't lead to any peace, which leads to basically a war zone across the Middle East. And we say this is good for us. Why is this good for us? What's the United States getting out of any of this? We haven't gotten anything out of any of this except massive geopolitical isolation. The most recent votes in the UN, for example, put the United States alone with Israel. And I shouldn't exaggerate. We have Micronesia on our side. We have Nauru on our side with its 12,000 people, maybe a couple of other countries. The whole rest of the world is saying, what is going on? Endless war in the Middle East. Well, this is because we're defending someone with some 7th century BC vision of what they want their country to be.
Were Americans involved in the overthrow of Assad last week?
Of course they were, because this has been an ongoing operation. Whether they were involved in the final days, I don't know. They were involved in the 13 years nonstop.
I don't understand how.
Actually, let me tell you an interesting story, by the way. The war started in 2011. It was called it was portrayed as always, as the CIA does, as a local uprising and the freedom fighters. And it was said this was Syrians protesting against Syria. That's always how any CIA regime change operation works. There may also be local opposition, but the CIA it provides the armaments, it provides the flow of heavy weapons, it provides the financing, it provides the training, it provides the camps, it provides the political organization. So this started in 2011. In 2012, there was already a bloodbath underway, and a lot of people dying, and a lot of civilians dying, and a lot of ancient historic sites, because this is the Fertile Crescent. This is the birthplace of humanity itself, of civilization, being destroyed. And so very senior global diplomat that I knew very, very well was tasked with trying to find peace. Peace, nice idea. Maybe we don't need the bloodbath. And I met him in the spring of 2012, and he said it failed. And I said, why did it fail? He said, well, we had a full peace agreement, but it was blocked by one party alone. We had the different forces in Syria, we had the regional, but it was blocked by one. Who was it blocked by? It was blocked by the United States government. Why? Well, because their condition was that Assad must go on the first day of the agreement, rather than a political process. Everyone else agreed on a political process, but the United States said, no, this is regime change. Assad must go on the first day, and that was not possible. So that was the end of the attempt at peace. So we should understand this was an American operation.
But what I didn't understand and still don't understand is why we're all required to hate Assad. I'm not just speaking for myself. I don't have strong feelings about Assad one way or the other. Apparently, he's protected the Christians, so I'm grateful for that as a Christian. But why am I required to hate Assad? Tulsi Gabbard went and met with Assad. She's been attacked ever since. Has anyone ever explained why Americans should hate Assad?
Because every regime change operation we ever do, we have to make sure that the opponent is the worst villain since Hitler or Hitler reincarnate.
Some ophthalmologist from London is a bloodthirsty dictator. I didn't really.
We have to say this, and this is part of the psyops or the info war that goes along with regime change operations. This is completely typical. And we're told if we don't stop him now, it's only going to spread. And
he'll be in Des Moines.
Exactly. This is the Nicaraguans were going to be in Harlingen, Texas. Remember, this is standard fare. It's so pedestrian, such bad script writing that you can't believe it's still rolled out.
But why doesn't someone at the New York Times just ask the obvious question, which is, why am I supposed to hate Assad exactly? Why is it somehow a test of my loyalty to the United States when I think of Bashar al-Assad? Like, who cares? Like, what? That's such a core question. I've never heard anyone ask that.
Can I laugh when you mention New York Times? Because they won't cover any historical background of any conflict at all, because all of this is aimed at a free hand for the security state, a free hand for the military.
But why would the New York Times be parroting the security state?
Well, I think that's a question that goes back decades, partly because it's staffed in part by probably people from the intelligence agencies. We've known that for years. I don't know.
At the New York Times.
But we know in the past the CIA just had reporters on the payroll. I mean, whether they do or not now, I have no idea. So I'm not making a current claim, but we know that that's a historic fact. We know historically that with very rare exceptions, the New York Times has just followed the unnamed official sources, that this is the whole MO. This patriotic newspaper follows what it's told to do. And it doesn't ask questions. It has not asked any questions about any of these wars in recent memory, not about Ukraine, not about the wars raging throughout the Middle East. As I said, I think there was one full page actually about Operation Timber Sycamore in 2016. You would think that something that got us into a war of 13 years where we spent billions of dollars, where hundreds of thousands of people died, even at this stage, there would be a kind of page or a box explaining the historical background to this, but it didn't exist. I actually wrote, I have to say, I wrote to one of the reporters saying, couldn't you mention a little background? Said, oh, very interesting idea, Mr. Sachs. So I'm waiting.
You wrote to a New York Times reporter.
Well, I know these people for decades.
Yeah.
And by the way, not only do I know them, and some I like very much, by the way, and some have been classmates of mine a long time ago, and they know things that they don't report. And that's also important to understand, that what they will say in private is the opposite of what their newspaper says. And I mean literally the opposite. So that's very worrying to me, because we operate foreign policy in secrecy. We do not have any kind of democratic oversight of foreign policy. There's no explanation of it. There's no accountability for it. It's in a very few hands. It's not in good or reliable hands. It's not explained. We gave over Middle East foreign policy to Israel a long time ago, not to U.S. interests, but to Israel's interests. That is the Israel lobby. And we don't hear questioning of this at all. Of course, not from the government, not from the Congress, not from oversight by any democratic institutions, nor does the mainstream media, which fewer and fewer people are interested in because they don't get any facts from it, look into these issues.